Hey everyone, welcome to this webinar by PRGX, 3 ways to minimize vendor abrasion with retail vendors. So the retailer and vendor relationship is built on an ongoing communication to order, receive, promote, and pay for goods and services. Inevitably, throughout the process, errors occur that lead to friction. However, the best-in-class retailers are putting tools and processes in place to minimize abrasion and strengthen partnerships with their vendor community. In this webinar, our speakers will identify common points of friction between retailers and vendors and discuss 3 areas of focus to minimize abrasion and ultimately improve the relationship. So thanks for taking about 30 minutes out of your day to join us. And just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Just let us know through the question box if you are having any issues with the audio or seeing the slides. You can also use this question box throughout the webinar, and we will do our best to get to those questions at the end. Lastly, you can follow PRGX on Twitter and LinkedIn to get alerts on more of our upcoming webinars. We have several coming up, which I'll also mention at the end there. But you can follow our social media channels, and we'll make sure that you're aware of the upcoming webinars we have. So our 2 speakers today are very experienced members of the PRGX team who work with our Fortune 500 retail clients. Scott Brown is the Regional Vice President of Client Services at PRGX. He has over 24 years of experience in the recovery audit business, and he works closely with clients on operational best practices and areas of process improvement. Our second guest is Patrick Miller, who is a Senior Audit Director here at PRGX. He started with PRGX as a staff auditor and has over 17 years experience in recovery audit. He's responsible for several retail accounts and has a lot of experience communicating with the vendor community. Welcome, Scott and Patrick, and I'll pass it over to you and chat with you at the end with questions.
Okay. Thank you, Tim, and thank you to everyone that has joined us today. Based on our experience working with top global retailers in the vendor community, we have observed and been a part of countless interactions between these partners. We've witnessed both good and bad processes or lack of processes, and have put together this webinar to highlight some of the things that you can do at your organization to minimize abrasion within your vendor community. Every organization already has the ability and the information to implement our recommendations. So we hope we can provide you with some simple ways that you can make a difference in your organization's vendor communication process. The retail and vendor relationship is built on ongoing communications to order, receive, promote, and pay for goods and services. Multiple points of contact that are not always aligned are required to drive the business, and inevitably throughout the process, errors occur that lead to friction. The best-in-class retailers are putting tools and processes in place to minimize abrasion and strengthen partnerships with their vendors. In this session, we will identify points of friction and discuss 3 key areas of focus to minimize abrasion with these partners. There are multiple opportunities for minimizing abrasion and strengthening vendor partnerships. Whether you develop policies, platforms, and/or rules of engagement, all of these can help define out your relationship and touchpoint protocols. Typically, the tools you have in place to help manage these processes are sufficient to achieve your operational goal. However, they are not necessarily user-friendly, intuitive, or provide all the necessary tools to ensure alignment with an outside or even inside user. When we review the most common themes that drive abrasion, we find that there's typically frustration through the process, access to the tool, change management, lack of clarity or detail, no backup for deductions, unrealistic expectations on timing of a response, age of transaction, even who the correct contact would be, whether it's buyer, accounts payable, freight, or anyone else within the organization. And one thing that we've really heard from the vendor community is there's really typically not a good feedback loop when resolution occurs. Good or bad, or whether the resolution is good or bad, notification should come at the time of that closure.
So our first example is leading with the deduction dispute process. There are times when suppliers receive payments from retailers that include deductions with minimal or lack of backup, which often leads to a dispute or basically a query about what is the charge containing. The deduction process can then go through and reach the retailer's inbound process, whether it's a best-in-class portal or a manual process. In turn, we realize that most retailers also have a very manual review process that requires various departments to become involved to find the right source of information to provide feedback to those suppliers. From this, it typically takes over 90 days to get some responses, with millions of dollars in annual disputes and millions of dollars in total count of disputes. What that can lead to is an expensive and time-consuming process for the retailers to provide that feedback to those suppliers. It also increases the liability as the unknown of maybe unreconciled or payments that might require payback to those suppliers. This can delay funds and cause confusion. Friction from lack of that transparency, those delayed funds, escalation policies, and potentially leading to long negotiated settlements, including repaying of the lack of materiality versus just merit alone. In the next example, we wanted to focus more on the promotional activity that takes place. Within the promotional process, the main driver is to have sales increase and enhance customer experience in the end to gain loyalty. There are very fluid deals that require extensive planning and setup, which can lead to errors, and the process without having a fully defined roles and responsibilities, easy to use tools, and SLAs. In the upper right chart, we'll show some cause and effect. Due to the complexity of the promotional process, there are many last-minute deals that occur. From that, funding might not always be accurately tracked, as the main goal is to get the items set up for the customers to experience the benefit of that. In addition, whether it's a last-minute deal or any deal that was pre-planned for a long time, there may be errors in the setup accuracy. This could lead to deals being missed, whether it's wrong periods, missed items, or just incorrect calculations. The third cause is really related to undocumented events. A phone call might take place between the retailer and the supplier. They plan to promote certain items, yet do not document it appropriately within the retailer's system. There could lead to a confusion on was funding supposedly to be provided. And the last example that we had was collection of calculation errors. More or less what that can entail is if information is not fed correctly from a promotional planning system to a vendor income collection process, there could require additional collections later on from a typical post-audit review. So what can we do? Time is of the essence, and really we want to make sure that there's clear roles and rules for the deal entry. Is it the vendor's responsibility or is it the retailer's? Also establish lead time to make sure some of those last-minute deals have enough checks and balances to make sure vendor income funding was accurately entered. And then finally, make sure everything was set up correctly, not only on the promotional side, but also the collection of vendor income side. Any delays or omissions can lead to incorrect or delayed billings, which causes some frustration from time to time. And when the post-audit review comes along, there could be a lag in the review process. That then also leads to additional problems such as prior year funds may no longer be readily available, lost margin throughout that whole process, and then really proof of performance. As people change roles and move off desk, it causes confusion and it causes some abrasion. Next, I'll transfer it over to Scott.
So what can each organization focus on to update current tools or practices to gain a better experience? First, having a portal in place really helps supplier gain the information they need to close out open issues with minimal retailer interaction required. Most of your companies already have a portal today, but is your portal a one-stop shop? Portals should be configured so that vendors can self-serve, where there's everything necessary for them to research a deduction, including vendor terms and conditions, routing guides, training manuals, and most importantly, the ability to gain backup and research deduction. The data already exists within all these retailing environments, so make it accessible. Be an open book. Because in the end, transparency builds trust. Everyone knows the rules of engagement and has the ability to research any dispute and back up their dispute with facts and data, which will shorten their research time and save costs on both sides.
Although most issues should be resolved with a well-defined portal, at times escalation or further communication will need to take place. Oftentimes we hear from vendors that it's hard to find someone to talk to, and they are required to submit all disputes through a ticket dispute type system. What we recommend is open lines of those communications to provide that supplier-vendor relation with the retailers. By establishing the rules of engagement previously addressed, it'll help outline when things need to be escalated even further. If the workload responsibilities and timing and expectations on responses are clearly defined, both parties will then be able to benefit, hopefully reducing vendor abrasion. Those documented service level agreements will also outline a reasonable expectation. Clear, concise escalation plan will then allow the vendors the ability to communicate with the vendors and to communicate with the retailers and to get to the right source overall. It'll eliminate the possibility of multiple interpretations of who, what, where, and when should be replying. If all those rules and of engagement are followed, then there needs to be a path to a human. And if that can take place after going through all the protocols, then it would allow and reduce that vendor abrasion overall. If, in the end, basically, simply putting it, if you consolidate and publish the rules, it should lower the vendor abrasion.
And finally, have a sense of urgency. Vendors want to focus on future funds more than prior errors. Every day an issue is not resolved, the more time, effort, and cost that's needed to be put into these, taking away time that should be allocated to driving the business. For vendor income areas, the importance of accuracy with regard to vendor income is a top priority as it drives overall profitability. A solution to both reduce abrasion and drive profitability is to accelerate the checks and balances or governance processes to close these issues as real time as possible. The benefits around addressing things earlier in the process is typically the vendor rep and the buyer are still in the same chair. They have a memory on what was agreed to. As Patrick alluded to, prior funds, if you catch it within the same fiscal period or within the same fiscal year, those funds are available. You get an accurate reflection of gross margin for each one of these deductions and each one of these processes. The backup and detail is readily available, and in the end, it reduces those financial surprises that sometimes from the audit world comes, a couple of years in arrears. Every organization needs to review your processes and develop an acceleration plan around your overall governance programs, whether that's compliance, audit, dispute management. Have documented procedures that you share with the vendor community. Have dispute SLAs that drive behavior and prioritization. Have an audit platform that's built on preventing errors or reviewing immediately after the transaction is complete. This acceleration moves your organization from a reactive to a proactive organization, and this will help drive accuracy, increase cash flow, and minimize abrasion with your vendors. In closing, we want to leave you with 3 areas of focus that can help you strengthen relations with your vendor community and cut down on long, drawn-out disputes that lead to abrasion on both sides. First, document all the rules of engagement and make them easily accessible. Sounds simple, but many times key elements are missing or very hard to find. In addition, and the harder one to address, is working with your IT groups on how to update your vendor portal to become that one-stop shop. Self-serving will dramatically reduce your costs related to disputes. Second, have that path to a human, and clearly define the appropriate human to call or email. Portals are great, but they can also be frustrating. Give the vendor someone to talk to. Finally, have a sense of urgency. With millions of transactions, there will be errors. Look at your processes, Can you accelerate any of your reviews? Do you understand where all the errors occur? And if you can catch these errors prior to them impacting a payment, deduction, or even a customer. If not, reach out. Our audit expertise understands the origin of errors. Acceleration is possible, and we can help. Thank you. With that, that brings us to the end of this session, and over to Q&A. Tim?
Great. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Patrick. So yeah, if anyone does have any questions, you can ask those in the question box. But firstly, we'll go through the ones that have come in during the webinar. Scott and Patrick, first question is, I understand that earlier is better for everyone, but how can we accelerate the identification of errors?
Yeah, that's a good question. Errors typically occur at the time of setup, not at the time of payment. It kind of depends on which type of error you're looking at, but a lot of times what we like to do, or say in the audit world, is when does a transaction go stale, or when can that error really start to occur? When we look at the example that Patrick laid out in terms of promotional activity, right? It's not when the customer buys the product that should have been on sale within the retailer's outlet. It's really when that deal was set up in the system within the client system to bill. We now have the ability with real-time data acquisition and the power of the computer these days to be able to look at those setups and anticipate errors that will happen within the billing process or the chargeback process. Additionally, you can look at things such as long-term rebates. Those are set up to run sometimes for a year at a time. Looking at those at the time they bill within the first month and being able to identify those errors closer to that setup process will allow you to fix the next 11 months of the billings. So the data truly exists out there to be real-time or even preventative. It's just a matter of knowing where to look and where those errors can occur.
Great. And the other question that has come in is very timely related to COVID-19, but the question is, with working from home, how do we address updating processes or portal information?
Another good question. I mean, really, right now is the right time, right? I mean, one of the things that we're seeing, and we interact with a lot of different clients and vendors during this time, and we'll work from home as well. What we're starting to find within the people that we're working with is they're focused on their day job right now. They have been doing that for the last 2.5, 3 months, depending on what their locations are. And there's starting to be a thirst to take on additional initiatives. Right, because when you're in the office, there's typically a lot of different ongoing initiatives that are going on. Reaching out to your peers within your organization right now to start thinking about how to update your portals, how to gather that information together, or even discuss with your IT a different type of project around that research, is getting people, conversations like that and initiatives like that are starting to get people excited right now. So right now is the right time to start talking to your peers about taking on some of these initiatives to make sure that communication process is updated.
Great, thanks, Scott, and thanks, Patrick, for joining us. It's very helpful, great tips. Just a reminder to everyone listening in, we have 2 more webinars coming up in the next week. How Spend Analytics complements a recovery audit on Thursday, June 4, and Reinventing Recovery Audit for Today's Retail Environment on Tuesday, June 9. In addition, in the PRGX Bright Talk channel, we have a whole bunch of on-demand webinars available, and on our website, PRGX.com, under the resources section, a number of white papers and ebooks as well. So thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Patrick.
All right. Thank you very much. Hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.